In this video, I'm going to talk about track mats and null objects in After Effects. I'll also share a few other common tools you might use in the program that'll help you become more efficient as you're starting to work here. So we are going to make this quick 4-second animation where a track mat or a mask reveals some text. Those things rotate and then they move off the screen. And through that, we're going to explore some of those features in After Effects. To get started, I'm just going to make a new composition. I'll leave this one here as my demo for reference. So I'm going to right click in my project pane and go to New Composition. These settings are okay. I'm just going to make this 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames a second. So now that we have a blank composition, the first thing I usually do is add in a background. The fastest way to do that is to double click on the rectangle tool, which will add in a new shape layer that fills the frame. And then I'm just going to change this color to something like a almost white. And then I'm going to rename this background. I can right click on this and then go to rename, or the shortcut is to select your layer and hit enter on the keyboard. Just going to call this BG for background. And then because I'm never going to touch this again, this is just going to serve as my background layer. I'm going to select the lock key here so I don't accidentally move it. And then I'm also going to use the shy feature to clean up my layers panel. The way that works is you need to make sure that you are in this mode in the timeline. You can toggle or switch modes using this switch down here, but you want to see this little head peeking over the wall. If I click that, you'll see the head moves down. That means this is marked to be a shy layer. And then if I click the shy icon up here, this hides all of the layers that are set to shy. And so this just kind of cleans up my layers panel a little bit. The first thing I want to do is add in my word. So I'm going to grab my text tool, clicking on the canvas. Just going to type in here, and then I'll worry about the size in a second. But first, I want to change this to a color I can see. I'll make this a dark purple. Hit OK. I'm going to make a few changes to this to scale it up. I can also resize my workspace here just so we can see a little bit better. I could scale this up using the point size here, and I could change the size of this, but the other option I have is to change this using scale, which is a property of the layer itself. Sometimes this is a little bit faster, it just depends on what other transformations you'll need to do during the animation. But in our case, I'm going to hit S on my keyboard, which is the shortcut to get my scale property down here. And then I'm just going to scale this up to a healthy size. I'm going to line this up in the composition using my alignment tools. It's going to snap to the composition, and I will center align this and then vertically align it as well. So this will be our text. We are going to change the color of it again once we get that mask layer, but I just wanted to start here. Okay, now that we have the size of our text, and you'll also see the tracking has been reduced here a little bit. I'm just using a large black weight of the text, which was already set from the previous composition that I made. But now that that's set up, we can start drawing our rectangle because we know what size we want it to be. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool again, and you can see this is a good example of, depending on if you have a layer selected or not, any shape tools will function as either a normal shape layer or as a mask. I can tell this is going to be a mask because my cursor has a square with a circle in it. So when I draw, this is going to reveal anything that's inside that shape. It's actually not what I want because I want to show you how track mats work. So I just need to deselect my layer. You can also switch between the mask and the shape option up here. You can see the star is your shape layer, and then this is to create a mask. And I'm just going to change this to a color we can see for a second. Okay, so when I don't have a layer selected, you can see this is going to draw a shape. I'm just going to make this something close to the size of the text. If I wanted to, I could rearrange these things so I could bring my text above my shape layer. But then I'm also going to center this up on the composition, and I will rename this to rectangle. To center this up, I'll use my alignment tools again. So now that's nice and neat here. From this, I'm actually going to bring my text down just a little bit so that it is lined up with the bottom of our shape. And then I'm going to change some of my anchor points or my origin points, and you'll see why in just a second. So I've grabbed my text. Now I'm just going to scoot this down until it meets the edge of the shape, maybe just a little bit beyond. Okay, so this is where I want my text to end up, but now I want to start animating it. So I like to put it where it's going to go and then animate backwards sometimes, just depending on what I'm doing, but it helps me sort of compose what I want the end state to be. I hit P on my keyboard to open up the position property. You can untwirl all the properties here, but it's underneath transform. And then I'm going to click the stopwatch just to add a keyframe here. And because this is where I want the text to end up, I'm actually going to scoot this forward a little bit in the timeline. And I'm holding Alt or Option on my keyboard to zoom in because I don't want this to take a full second. I actually want this to take much less time. So around frame 20, this is going to end up here. And then actually at frame 0, I'm going to back this up to above our mask. And you'll see that when I move this, as long as my playhead is somewhere else, any change I make, this will add an additional keyframe wherever I've made that change. So if I hit play now, you'll see that my word falls down. It's quite static right now. We can ease that to give it some little bit of life. And I'm actually going to ease out so that it starts slow and speeds up. And when I do that, it falls with a little more weight. That's still too slow for me. Oh, what did I do? I lost my first keyframe is what happened. I moved it off the page. Let's try 10 frames. That's a little faster. That looks good to me. So now I'm going to fix these colors so that you can see how I want these to end up. So I'm going to change my rectangle fill here. I'm going to change this to that purple color. And I'm going to change my text color to the color of the background. Now, because we're changing it to the color of the background, technically we would get the same optical effect as masking. But if this were any other color, in fact, I'll first do this with another color just so you can see how this will work. We'll do this bright green. That looks fun. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that this text is only showing when it is within the bounds of the shape. And to do that, we're going to use what is called a track matte. Now in After Effects, you have both track mattes and you also have masks. It just depends on what you want to do, whether you use one or the other. But typically, if you're animating the thing, it's helpful to use a layer as a track matte so that you have more control over its properties as opposed to a mask. Because we want this to tilt and move around, we're going to use a track matte to mask the word off. The way that we do that is we're going to switch our modes. If you're ever looking for something in your layers panel and you don't see it, you probably need to toggle modes. Here's our text, here's our rectangle, and we are going to use this rectangle as a track matte for the text. There's a couple ways we can do that. We can select the layer in here, and when I do that, you'll see that it only reveals what's within that rectangle. I'm going to undo that for a second and show you how the pick whip works. These little spirals in After Effects let you select a property and parent it to another property. So when I select that pick whip icon on the text, I can drag it over to the rectangle and it does the same thing. It changes our rectangle to be our track matte. There's a couple different modes for this. The default is alpha, which means that whether or not the item is visible when it's within the track matte. You can also use the Luma mode, which is the luminosity of the difference in the colors. And then sometimes you might need to invert the track matte. So this is only showing what is outside that shape. You can also see that by default, it hid our rectangle layer because we told it that we want this to be a track matte. It thinks that we don't actually want to see it. In this case, I actually do want to keep that purple fill on here, so I'm just going to turn the visibility back on. So you'll see that that whoa text is only visible when it's inside the rectangle. Okay, so that's how you use track mattes. There's a couple other things we want to do to make this more interesting, though, which is that rotation of both the text and then also of the rectangle behind it. Let's start with the rectangle. And what we want this to do is sort of rotate on this bottom center point here. Now I could hit R or open up my transform properties to get the rotation. I'm going to go ahead and click the stopwatch here so that we have a keyframe to start with. And then maybe we'll go to something like frame 20 for this to start. Some shortcuts for moving forward and backward on your timeline. If you hold Control or Command Shift and then the right or left arrow keys, you will jump forward or backward 10 frames. If you just hold Control and use your arrow keys, you'll move forward and backward 1 keyframe. If you want to move to the previous keyframe or the next keyframe that you've placed, you can use the J and K keys. So when I push J, I move back to the previous keyframe. When I push K, my playhead jumps to the next keyframe. But for now, let's go to around keyframe 20. I'll make sure that this is where that rotation starts. Move forward a few more frames. And then I will change this to something like, let's go with negative 20 degrees. But you'll see this is actually not rotating from the bottom here where I want it to. It's rotating from this anchor point or the origin point. So we actually need to change within this shape where that anchor point is. So I'm going to undo this for a second, show you how to do that. So in order to move this, we need to use the pan behind tool. That's up here. It's this little box with the arrows pointing outwards. When I select that, it will let me click and drag this anchor point wherever I want to place it. And now any transformations that I do will happen from that point. There are some options to snap to various positions on the screen, but we're not making any huge changes, so I'm just going to eyeball this. So now that I've placed that there, if I jump forward a couple of frames, change this to negative 20, you'll see that it's rotating from right there. Another trick is the ability to copy paste keyframes. So I could copy these two. I could move forward another 5. Paste these in here. Jump to my next keyframe with K. And then change this from negative to positive by deleting that minus key. And we should rotate both ways. That's way too fast, so I actually want to stretch these keyframes out a bit. One shortcut for doing that is you can select all your keyframes and hold Alt or Option. I'm going to click and drag on my last keyframe, and you'll see that it sort of transforms those to keep them evenly spaced. It's a little too slow, so I'll do that again to slow it down. I don't want this to end over there. I do want this final frame here to go back to a level position. So I'll just copy this first keyframe, and then paste it at the end. Just kind of eyeball this. I could measure this or flip them around so that this is exact, but that looks pretty even. The reason this looks so mechanical, see there, that's the end. Here it goes all the way to the right. What we don't want is this extra frame. Okay, that looks a little better. I just needed to add in that last keyframe where this moves back to the center. But it feels really mechanical, so I want to ease these. Gonna right click, go to keyframe assistant, or you could hit F9 on your keyboard. I'm just gonna easy ease them. To add some secondary action, it would be nice to rotate the text alongside the rectangle, but in the opposite direction. That way we have some interesting movement. But that text is also going to rotate from its origin or anchor point, which right now is at the bottom left of the text, which is an issue. So when we try to change that, that's actually going to create some problems, but that's okay. We're just going to redo some of those initial movement keyframes. So you'll see what happens when I grab my anchor point tool and try to move this over to the bottom center of the text. It's trying to update the positioning to, because all of these transformations are from the reference point of that origin point. So you can see how it's having to move down and then over to get there. So that's actually not what I want. I'm going to go ahead and delete this second keyframe, scooch this one back, and then we'll just make sure that on our first keyframe, you can see it's selected up here. I'm going to horizontally align that to make sure that it's right above where I want it to end up. And now it looks how we expect it to. And we can go ahead and rotate this as well. And we actually want to do the same rotation that we're doing with the rectangle, just in the opposite direction, but at the same time. So I'm going to jump back to my first rotation keyframe on the rectangle. I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to select the rotation on the text layer and paste these in. Now, if I play this now, those are going to move in parallel with the rectangle, and that's still not very interesting. What I actually want this to do is to rotate the opposite direction. So a nice feature that After Effects has is I'm going to select all of these keyframes, right click. Within the keyframe assistant, I can time reverse these keyframes. It doesn't look like anything has happened, but what it's actually done is it's horizontally flipped all of these. And so now you can see that it is playing in the opposite direction. Those keyframes are essentially backwards. So we're almost done here. The last thing we want to do is we want to move these things off the canvas after that motion. And for this, we're going to use a null object. Now, what a null object is essentially it's just an empty layer. It doesn't have any visibility, but it allows you to control other things on the page. So if I zoom out, let me clean up some space over here. I'm hitting U on my keyboard to cycle through hiding different properties. Going to right click, go to New, Null Object, and you see I have null1 here. So what we can do is we can move both the text and the rectangle at the same time by parenting their positions to this null object. Let me show you what that means. The first thing I'm going to do is go into my transformation, and I'm going to separate the X and Y dimensions so that we're just controlling the X positioning of these things. By default, it has them together. So if I go to position and right click on these numbers, I can go to separate dimensions. You'll see now I have X and Y position. I'm going to do the same thing under my text. You'll see it duplicates those keyframes for X and Y. This won't affect anything, but you'll notice what we could do, because only the Y positioning is actually changing for this time, I could actually delete those keyframes on the X position and it wouldn't hurt anything. Then I'll do the same thing here. Separate dimensions. And now you'll see we have this pick whip again for basically every property. What we can do is we can parent the X position of both of these layers to the X position of the null object, and then just place 2 keyframes for moving the null. We won't have to do that over and over on every single layer that we want to move with it. So on X position, let's get to the point where we want these to move. Around there is fine. I'll place a keyframe on the X position of my null object, and then on the X position property of my text and my rectangle, I'm going to click and drag. I'll tie those to the null. Do the same thing on this layer. You'll see that turns red, which means this is now controlled by this. So if I change the X position of, let me jump forward, the null object, everything else moves with it. You can do this with all kinds of things. So here I'll just move this totally off the canvas. I'm going to go ahead and add some easing to that. So we will ease in so that it speeds up as it goes. That is essentially everything. So we've covered how to use track mats, we've covered null objects as controllers, and we took a look at a few other things in After Effects that you can do to make your workflow a little bit easier. The last thing to do is to render this out. If you don't already know how to do that, I'm first going to set the end bounds of this workspace to around 4 seconds. You can either click and drag on this highlighted portion here, or you can select, if you hit the N key on your keyboard, it will change to wherever your playhead is. I'll go to File, Export. If you have Adobe Media Encoder, you can send it straight to Media Encoder. It's a little bit faster, or you could add it to the render queue and render it out here.